I'm going to talk on the topic of understanding cultural differences. I'm going to start out by relating an experience that I had a couple years ago when I used to work for the Houston Post as a newspaper boy. What we would do is that we would go to this warehouse and we would wait for the truck to come deliver the papers to us. And at the Houston Post, we had all types of nationalities and all types of races. We had whites, blacks, Hispanics, and Vietnamese. So what we would do when we were waiting for the truck is we would put our carts in single file. That way when the truck got there, we would get our papers in the order that we arrived at the warehouse. And this completely confused the Vietnamese. They had no idea what we were doing. They wanted to get their papers and get out as soon as they could. So when the truck pulled up and we're all waiting in line to get our papers, they would just rush ahead and grab the papers off the truck. Obviously, this is an area of cultural differences. And I'm sure some of you have had similar experiences that in dealing with foreigners, differences arose and the situation that you were interacting with them wasn't as successful as you wanted it to have been. Therefore, it is my purpose at the end of this presentation that, number one, you will perceive of the importance of understanding cultural differences. Number two, you will be motivated to educate yourself to deal with these cultural differences on a day-to-day basis. And number three, by educating yourselves, you will become a success both in your personal life and in your career. As a measure of my credibility, I have both secondary sources and primary sources. The secondary source is Managing Cultural Differences by Philip Harris and Robert Moran. As far as my primary source, I used to work for a foreigner, Bangladesh descent. And when I first started working for him, he didn't distrust me at all. I mean, he didn't trust me at all. Because he didn't know who I was, and he didn't know if I was ripping him off behind his back. So as time went on, and he began to trust me, our relationship opened up, and we began to interact successfully. As far as a preview of what I'm going to do tonight, I'm going to go through and explain some differing perceptions and differing values that you will have when you interact with your foreign boss or foreign workers. And then later on, I will explain the steps of action that you will need to take to educate yourselves to deal with these differences when they arise. First of all, I'm sure a lot of people here will say, why do I have to know cultural differences? I'm going to work for First National Bank of Lubbock, and that's that. Well, there's an interesting phenomenon going on in this country right now, whereas Japanese investment is increasing in this country, because about a year and a half ago, we started to devalue the dollar. And when the value of the dollar goes down, the Japanese yen goes up. So it's more profitable for the Japanese to invest in America than it is in Japan. And Newsweek, February 2nd issue, about a month ago, it was reported that an estimated 250,000, almost 250,000 Americans are now working for Japanese firms. And because of this future investment demand, the Tokyo's Ministry of International Trade and Industry has predicted that within the next decade, there will be an increase of 840,000 additional jobs. So that means by 1996, there's going to be over 1 million Americans working for Japanese firms. So you will need to understand the differences that will come between you and your boss and you and your fellow workers. Now my plan for tonight is to go through and show you and talk about some various perceptions and values that are different between the United States and Japan. And these perceptions and values are what keep me apart from the foreigner. We can't interact on a one-to-one basis because we three values that I have listed here: ethnocentrism, concept of time, and the value of the person as opposed to the value of the group. And we'll talk about each of these values now. Ethnocentrism is the idea that my culture and my American country is the best in the world. And the way I do things is the best way to do them. At the same time, the Japanese also have this ethnocentristic value. They think that their culture and their nation is the best, and that their way of doing things is the better way. And the second value that I'm going to talk about is the concept of time. In Japan, the concept of time is a very abstract concept. They are not as concerned with schedules and deadlines as we are in America. Matter of interest, in the General Motors Toyota plant out in Fremont, California, they don't even have a time clock. Workers come to work in the morning and just start working. Okay. The final value that I'm going to talk about is the value of the person as opposed to the value of the group. In America, we're brought up to believe that the individual is unique. This is what gives Burger King their basis for their ad campaign of "Have it your way." In Japan, on the other hand, the value of the group is more important than the person. As an example of this, I read a case study that a couple years ago, there was an American in charge of a production division over in Japan. And during the course of time, some mistakes and some problems arose. And he called a special meeting of his Japanese bosses together, and he prepared a detailed briefing, and he said, this is what went wrong, and this is what I did to try to correct it. And he also, at the same time, tried to point out that, different person in the same situation would have reacted the same way. Well, the Japanese were offended by this, because they thought if there was a mistake made, it was a mistake of the whole group, not the individual. They thought that this person was bringing shame upon himself by stating, that this problem is my problem. Okay. Two perceptions that I've listed here are language and body language. First of these, language. In Japan, they have a tendency to avoid saying no. They would rather tell foreign businessmen what they think they want to hear instead of what the Japanese really feel. It's been said in Japan that a yes means maybe. Maybe means no. And if the Japanese tell you no, that means you better not come back. Okay? But what I plan to do now is to take these differing values and perceptions and incorporate them in a real-life situation for you to help you visualize what I'm trying to relay to you. Let's say that we've all just been hired by an international firm in Japan. And we take the negative situation where we don't take the time to educate ourselves. We just go over to Japan with superior American attitude, we do everything great. We go over there and say we're going to do this job in our time frame. And we go over there and we say that we're going to do it as an individual. We don't really care about the group. Let's look at the results that could happen from this. First of all, you're not going to have any Japanese friends. They're going to think you're very arrogant, and they're not going to want to be around you. Second of all, you're not going to be very happy in your job because you're not going to have any friendly coworkers. This, of course, will lead to you either quitting the job or perhaps being fired. And we all know if you're fired from your job, you fall behind in your student loan repayments. So that's not a very good situation. Let's look at the positive situation, where we take the time to educate ourselves. We understand cultural differences that might come up. We go over there with an open, unbiased attitude. We say we're going to do this job within your time frame, and that we're going to do it in group interaction. We're not going to be the individual. Okay? Let's look at the results from this. First of all, we're going to have a lot of friends. The Japanese are going to like us. When this happens, we're going to be more happy with our job, and we're going to get promotions faster. We'll be financially successful. Okay? So hopefully, to summarize this presentation, I'd like to point out that by this time, you should be aware of the importance of knowing cultural differences. You should motivate yourself to go out and educate yourself on these differences that you may incur in day-to-day life. success in your career and success in your personal life. Any questions?
Are there any seminars or anything that you know of that a person could attend to
Yes. Well,
prepare himself?
there's an organization up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's called Intercultural Communications Incorporated, and they have individualized programs that you can go up there and you can say, I'm going to go to Japan next month and train me, and they will teach you cultural aspects, customs, values, beliefs, and the whole works.
Not necessarily just Japan, but like you had to go to
Yeah.
Europe or Middle East.
They've got programs for almost any nationality, I'm sure.
Presentations. And our first speaker is Danny McIntyre. And I think we've got the goal up top.
Damn it. Why did I just do that? I would venture to bet that no two people in here interpreted why I just did that in exactly the same manner. Probably had a lot of similar interpretations because we're all from the same American cultural background. We know that when I slammed on the podium, I was probably angered or I was disgusted. Okay? Let's take a situation in which this is Assembly of the United Nations and that we're all ambassadors from all around the world. What if I slam on the podium? Would we all interpret it the same way? Probably not. What I'm going to talk to you tonight is the need to understand cultural differences, and this will help you become successful in your personal life and the success of your career. At the end of my presentation, you will, number one, perceive of the importance of understanding cultural differences. Number two, you will be motivated to educate yourselves on the cultural differences that you will experience within yourself and the people that you meet with on a day-to-day basis. And number three, by educating yourselves, you will enjoy personal success and the success of your career. What I'm going to try to do tonight is to bring this into focus and show you some different perceptions between the United States and Japan, and hopefully you can take these areas of conflict and you can apply them to your day-to-day situations. As a measure of my credibility, I have both primary and secondary sources. I've researched this book, Managing Cultural Differences, by Philip Harris and Robert Moran. And I also have a primary source that I used to work for a foreigner. And when I first started working for him, he didn't trust me at all. He didn't know what type of person I was, and he didn't know if I was ripping him off behind his back. But as time went on, he began to trust me, and our relationship started to open up, and we began to interact successfully. I'm sure a lot of you are saying, why do I need to know about cultural differences? I plan to get a job at First National Bank of Lubbock, and that's that. Well, there's an interesting phenomenon going on in this country right now in which Japanese are increasing their investment in this country. And it started about a year and a half ago when we devalued the dollar, and as a result, again, value went up. I'm going to show you a headline that I found in last Friday's Wall Street Journal. So this is happening right now. Changing tactics, battling a high yen. Many Japanese firms shift work overseas. It was estimated by Bill Powell and others in February 2nd issue of Newsweek that in 1986 there were almost 250,000 Americans working for the Japanese. It's been estimated that because of this increased investment in 1996, this number will reach 1 million Americans working for the Japanese. So the need is there, because if you may get a job at First National Bank of Lubbock, but the Japanese may buy out that bank. They may be your boss. What I plan to do now is to show you some differing perceptions and talk about them a bit. Between me and a foreigner, or me and you, we have differing perceptions that keep us apart. Okay, I'm going to talk about 4 of these between the United States and Japan. First one is national pride. National pride means that my culture, my American culture, my nation are the best in the world, and that my way of doing things is the best way to do them. Well, at the same time, the Japanese say, well, my Japanese culture and my country are the best in the world, and my way of doing things is the best. So obviously, this is an area of conflict. The The second one I've listed here is the values of the person as opposed to the values of the group. In America, we've been raised to believe that the individual is unique. This is where Burger King gets its basis for its ad campaign of "Have it your way." Okay, over in Japan, on the other hand, they feel that the group is more valued than the person. I'd like to share an experience of a case study that I read that a couple years ago. There was an American working for a production division in Japan. And in the course of time, some errors and mistakes arose, and this American called a meeting together, and he was talking to the Japanese bosses, and he was saying, this is what happened, and this is what I did to correct these actions. And the Japanese were very offended by this, because they felt that if mistakes were made, they were made by the group and not by the individual. And that this individual is bringing shame upon himself by saying, hey, I made the mistake. Third perception I'm going to talk about is one of verbal communication. In Japan, they have a tendency to avoid using the word no. They'd rather be polite and tell you what you want to hear, not necessarily how they feel. It's been said in Japan that a yes is interpreted as a maybe should be interpreted as a no, and a no means you better not come back. Final perception I'm going to talk about is nonverbal communication. The authors of our textbooks, Sigmund and Bell, have stated that 55 to 65% of communication is nonverbal. This means eye contact, facial expressions, and hand and body movements. By now, if I was in Japan, I would be offended by Dean Stem, because crossing one's legs in Japan is a sign of disrespect. To the Japanese, they figure that sitting erect in one's chair is a sign of physical and mental control. Now, what I like to do is take these perceptions and put them in a real-life visualization for you. Let's all imagine that we've just been hired by an international firm in Japan. Let's say that we don't take the time to educate ourselves, and we go over there with our superior American attitude, and we say we're going to do this as a person. We don't care about the group. Let's look what can happen from this. First of all, we're not going to have a lot of friends. Japanese are going to shun us as being arrogant. This is going to carry over to our job, because we're not going to be happy with ourselves, because no co-workers are going to want to be around us. If this happens, we'll probably quit our job, or eventually we will be fired. Let's look at the positive situation. We do take the time to educate ourselves. We go over there with an open, unbiased attitude, and we say, hey, we will do this as a group, not as a person. Let's look what can happen here. First of all, we're going to have a lot of Japanese friends. We're going to be happy with our work because everyone's going to be friendly. Co-workers will be friendly to us. And finally, we will get promotions faster, which will lead to greater financial success. So obviously, the positive situation of educating ourselves is a situation in which we should strive for. Okay, now I'm going to go over some steps of action that you can go about to educate yourselves on these cultural differences. Okay, first of all, you can go to these organizations around the country, like Intercultural Communications in Minnesota, that will take the time to have individualized programs to teach you different values and beliefs of the different culture that you're about to enter. Second steps for action would be simply to read books. This book here, Managing Cultural Differences, is an excellent source of cultural problems that you might run into. And the final step for action would be to watch educational programs on TV. National Geographic is always coming out with shows such as the life of the Japanese businessman. So finally, hopefully by the end of my presentation tonight, you now will have perceived the importance of understanding cultural differences. You should be motivated to go out and educate yourselves on these cultural differences that you may encounter in your day-to-day lives. And finally, by educating yourselves, you will come to enjoy personal success as well as the success of your career.